Hello and welcome back to The Other Perspective, a space where we interrogate the thing behind the thing that is the thing. As usual, kindly press the like button down below, share and subscribe. Today we discuss the state of corruption in Africa in commemoration of the International Anti-Corruption Day, which happens every 9th of December, which is tomorrow. Tomorrow, the world will commemorate the International Anti-Corruption Day. This commemoration is intended to raise public awareness of the evils of corruption and to foster public support in the fight against graft. But does this day mean anything to the barefoot man or woman at the grassroots level in Africa? With me to find these answers and more are three Ugandan panelists, to begin with Uganda's anti-corruption warrioress and Executive Director, Anti-Corruption Coalition Uganda, Ms. Cissy Kagaba. You're most welcome to the show. Second, we have another woman. We can't hear you, Cissy.
I think I've unmuted. Thank you.
All right.
Is that better?
Second, yeah, that's better. Second, we have another woman. She is an activist, a journalist, and also a regular panelist on the show, Ms. Prisca Wanyenya. Good to see you again, and welcome to the show.
Thanks, Lisa. Good morning to the listeners and the panelists.
Good morning.
And thirdly, we do have, he is a Pan-Africanist, a pro-democracy activist, and also an anti-corruption activist, Mr. Henry Muguzi. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Lisa. Always an honor to be here.
Yeah, so let's get straight to the conversation. Cissy, I will be beginning with you. The International Anti-Corruption Day has been commemorated since 2003, when the United Nations Convention Against Corruption came into force, and many African countries ratified it. Yet corruption in Africa remains unmoved. What, in your view, is the rationale for commemorating this day?
I didn't get the last bit, Lisa.
Yes, UN ratified UN in 2003, UN ratified the Convention Against Corruption, and many African countries ratified it, yet corruption in Africa remains unmoved. So in your view, what is the rationale for commemorating this day?
Well, thank you very much, Lisa. And I think for me, the importance of commemorating the day is just to continuously talk about the fact that corruption is still with us, and which is one of those things that we cannot stop talking about. But then also to be in compliance with UNCAP, because we know that you have the United Nations Convention Against Corruption, and that is where we derive from the day that is supposed to be celebrated tomorrow. And of course, we know that this year's theme is ensuring that there's an active citizenry in the fight against corruption. So I think for me, it's important that we continuously talk about issues of corruption, because if we don't talk, then eventually the voices are going to go down. So it is quite important that we have to continuously remind our governments of their commitments and their promises. Because remember that as a country, we have a relatively robust legal and institutional framework. But I think not very long ago, the Inspector General of Government said that we lose over 10 trillion. Now, when you look at the 10 trillion that is lost, and also look at how much is recovered, because I think, yes, the Minister in charge of Directorate of Ethics and Integrity, while in Parliament, said that they had recovered around 3 point something or 5 billion. Now, if you look at how much is lost vis-a-vis how much is gained or recovered, that really shows that there's a very big gap, which means that talk and the continuous advocacy against corruption has to, we just have to continue talking about it until those that are in positions of power are able to effect the change that is needed.
Thank you so much, Cissy, for making that clear. So this goes to you all, but I'll begin with you, Henry. Soon after 2003, the African Union established her own version of the African Union Charter for Preventing and Combating Corruption. Subsequently, the AU set aside July 11th as the African Anti-Corruption Day. In your view, which of the two should Uganda commemorate? I'm beginning with you, Henry.
Yeah, thank you very much, Lisa. Of course, before answering your question, just to add my voice on the many voices of the citizens of the world that are commemorating this anti-corruption the International Anti-Corruption Day. I know that in the developed North, to be specific, I think the Americans, the events to commemorate this day started since Monday. There's been a series of virtual engagements ongoing. And of course, like Cissy said, to remind the leaders, but also citizens, that everybody has a role to play. Because when it comes to corruption, there is no single entity or person that can fight it. And which is why it tells you how dangerous it is, because as you know, when we come to fight about corruption, it is everybody knows it is such a monster that even the words we use to deal with it are militaristic. That's why we use words such as fight, combat. You understand? Militaristic. So it tells you what kind of enemy we have. And so it's important that we get to renew to remind ourselves of everybody's role, because the fight against corruption cannot be successful if the role of either the citizens or government or media or private companies, religious leaders is missing out in the equation. But to the question, we know that the African Union soon after enacted what they called the African Union Anti-Corruption Charter for preventing and combating corruption. And they also declared July the 11th as the the African Anti-Corruption Day. And for me as a citizen, I get to be at a loss because it is not clear which day I should actually put or place on top of the other. Should I place the International Anti-Corruption Day on top of the African Anti-Corruption Day, or should I do the opposite? It's quite confusing. You also know that most of these countries in Africa have gone on to enact legislation to domesticate either the UN Convention Against Corruption or the African Union Charter Against Corruption. But you see, it remains just on paper. And therefore, corruption remains unmoved, like you said. It's such a huge log, huge mountain that doesn't seem to be touched. But also, there is a way in which we have come to accept it. So I don't know which day we should, and also whether to have these days is consequential, because there is a sense in which most of the leaders of Africa have mastered the game of tolerating that day. So on that day, they will come out and make all sorts of statements, and give all sorts of reassurances, including promising to deal with the vice for good. But when the day goes, you don't see anything much coming through from the promises. And so the cycle has gone on and on and on and on. So for me, as the ordinary African, I ask myself which one should I should press before the other. And by the way, I also know that some of these countries have not even ratified the anti-corruption, the African Union Charter for preventing and combating corruption. I know that out of the 55 countries in Africa, only 44 have ratified it. The others are yet to do so. So questions still remain on how serious these leaders of ours are when it comes to fighting with corruption. The question could be why. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Henry, for that. So from what you're saying is, are you trying to say that these days we have Henry, are you trying to say that both these days are irrelevant in the fight against corruption?
No, the days are not irrelevant because we need to keep reminding these leaders. But the thing is, how for us to move away from reminding them to translate that into action, because this day should be there. You know, we have the 10 commandments that we have been upon us since the days of Moses. But every day you go to church, they remind you of these commandments. Maybe we would have these reminders much more frequently than ever after 12 months. But I think the principle of having this days commemorated is good. the challenge is how do we move away from just commemorating to action?
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for that. So this goes to Prisca. To date, almost all the 55 countries in Africa have anti-corruption laws and a dedicated government agency or agencies responsible for fighting corruption. But corruption is not only unmoved, it is pervasive and escapable. What is Africa failing to get right? Prisca.
Thanks, Lisa, for the question. Now, I pick it from the point that Henry was making on which day that we should highlight when it comes to fighting corruption, because you're looking at the African Union Day, the one in July, then we are looking at the one in December, the one for the international in December. So, and when you, I'm picking it from the point when you look at the repetition of the African Union itself, on many occasions, even the citizens within the continent have called on their countries to withhold their membership in the African Union, because they tend to think it's a body that is there to support the dictators and the autocratic rulers, because most times when the African Union rarely comes out to call out the evil on corruption. So the mere fact that they have lost the respect for the citizen in their very continent, that is the starting point as to why African Union has failed to fight corruption. And when you look at the International Day, it's really organized. Transparency International comes out with its report and tells you this is how each country is performing. But where are the reports of the African Union, on how their member states are performing? And when you add up all these things, you tend to realize that for them, the African Union is paying its allegiance to the leaders, not the citizens in the continent. And on top of to add on that, when I happened to listen into the statement that was made by the minister yesterday at Parliament to commemorate the Anti-Corruption Day in Kololo. So and the figures that she gave were so alarming that I reached a point where I was like, maybe it is perhaps the time that we learned to live with corruption. Because I even talked to Cissy yesterday on phone. I think she knows that. So the minister said that as per from December 2022, the time we are on, the IGG has recovered 2 billion shillings, then another 700 through court orders. Then the DPP had recovered 34,000 US dollars. That's around 121 million. Then the other corruption agencies had recovered 29, and I added up, the figure was about 31 billion that was recovered total in 1 year in Uganda. And you look back to the report that the IGG made on the perception of corruption in Uganda. The latest one, I think, was in 2019, where they had noted that we are losing about 20 trillion annually. So you're looking at a recovery of 130 billion vis-a-vis a loss of 21 billion. 21 billion is almost half of our budget, because our budget is around 45, 47 trillion. So, but you're losing 21 to corruption related charges, and somebody has the guts to stand.
That's about 43% of 44% of the budget.
Yes, you're better at my maths. So at your maths. So you're looking at somebody without shame stands before the floor of Parliament and says, we have recovered 31 billion, but you have lost this. And on top of that, she's asking for more money to fund the agencies. So even if I think the willingness you have to ask yourself, is the African Union willing to even fight corruption in the first place? Because we very well know that corruption is what's sustaining most of the regimes in Africa, most of the regimes. So we have to first question the willingness of African Union to fight corruption before we even get onto something else. Because when you try to, as the activists and civil society have always told us as journalists, we have to break down. We have to attach a face to this money. We just don't have to throw it around. The 20 trillion, what does it do? You are looking at 43% of our budget. What does it do? The education UNRWA is getting about 5 trillion in a year. Education sector is getting about 1 point something trillion. So that is the impact until the impact of the loss to corruption. So until the African Union shows its willingness or even an effort to even try to fight corruption, apart from designating a day for it to appear before the international community that they are trying. Because I think all they are doing is designating a day. That, and they try to show probably their funders and donors that we are trying to do something. But there has to be a commitment to fight corruption and realize that their allegiance lies to the citizens of Africa, not the rulers.
Okay. Thank you so much, Prisca. So, Cissy, I'll
Can I
push
say
this question.
something before you come in, Elizabeth? Can I say something?
Yes,
Because
Henry.
Prisca has just raised something. You see, the IG has only in 12 months, it has only been able to recover 2 billion. But the budget for the Inspectorate of Government for the entire year is 45.413 billion. So we are spending 45.413 billion for you to recover only 2 billion? Are you kidding me? What is the rationale for this institution? Are we not better off closing it? Back to you, Lisa.
Lisa, let me speak back to because when the IG came to Parliament, I think about 1 or 2 months back, was meeting with the Speaker, trying to familiarize their working relationship, talk about the DGF, how the closure has affected them, and she said that 80% of the money that IGG gets from Parliament, that is allocated from government, 84% is on staff costs. So and when she made that, I checked. I made a quick search on their budget, and in this current year, they had received 53 point. They were allocated 53.4, and of which, on going further, I realized that specialized investigation IG had allocated 1.5 billion, and prosecution of corruption cases was allocated 1.4. Remember, they are getting 53. So it tells you the chunk. And when the minister was making that statement yesterday, she said, we have recovered 2 billion against a budget of 1.5 billion that is allocated to investigation of corruption. So that is now the line that I brought up. They look at the chunk, the figure they give on the investigation of corruption. That is the 1.5. The one for specialized investigation is the one she quoted, but she made it appear like it is the whole budget for the IG. Of course, IG can't get 1.5 billion. I think that's all.
Wow. Thank you so much, Prisca, for bringing that out. It's very interesting to know that. So, Cissy, to date, almost all the 55 African anti-corruption agencies. In Uganda, we have the IGG, we have the State House Anti-Corruption Unit, and many other agencies that are fighting corruption. But corruption still remains persistent. What is Africa failing to get right? Why are we still in this state?
Well, I think one of the issues that we need to consider as to why we still have high levels of corruption. And well, of course, we need to appreciate the fact that there are different African countries that have performed well. If you look at the Corruption Perception Index of Transparency International, you realize that countries like Botswana, perform relatively better than some other countries. So what we need to ask ourselves is, what are other countries doing that some other countries are not doing? But I think for me, the whole issue goes back to impunity. Because if you have all these laws in place and you're not following these laws, and and the interesting bit, especially with our government, is that we have the Auditor General's reports. When you look at the Auditor General's report, they're very telling. There's a lot of information that is in the Auditor General's report. But what is interesting is that government has failed to actually even implement the recommendations that are coming out of its own reports. I was telling someone today when I was appearing on one of the TV stations that the issue that people are talking about today of the airport and the contracts, I mean, if you look at the Auditor General's report 2 years ago, the Auditor General in his report said that there are certain contracts that have been signed that are detrimental to our assets and things like that. This is information that is in the Auditor General's report 2 years back, because I remember reading it. And the Auditor General says contracts. The Auditor General did not say contract. So right now we're only looking at one contract where we're talking of Uganda Airlines and things like that. But I'm sure that there are very many other contracts that have been signed that are probably going to be, that are going to work against us as a country. And this is in the Auditor General's report. This is not a civil society report. So one of the reasons as to why we're going to continuously see corruption not going down is even the entities that have been put in place. Some of our governments do not respect their own government entities that have been put in place to curb corruption. So, and that is why I say that even if we have all these very many laws, it's not even about the laws, but if you have one or two laws, as long as they're well enforced and well implemented. Otherwise, we're going to continuously talk about corruption, and yet there's already a lot of information out there. And then the other issue is the Auditor General still produced a report on COVID. But have we seen any action being taken? What we hear right now, the Inspector of Government talking about, is a lifestyle audit. Yes, the lifestyle audit is a very good one. But other than the lifestyle audit, there are already other audits that have already been done. What has been done to take action against those that have been implicated in some of those audit reports? Because if you have the value for money report, you have the Auditor General's report on COVID, which highlights quite a lot of interesting things. What have we seen being done? When you even look at the Auditor General's report, there's why he says, I have raised this issue even in my previous audit, which means that the issues that keep on coming up, but no action is being taken. So there's that whole issue of lack of enforcement and implementation of government reports and even of the laws itself. So the government will continue to talk about its commitment to fight corruption, but as long as they fail to implement some of their own recommendations, it is still going to remain atop the usual rhetoric, because it's just a simple thing. Just start from your own, just start from your house, just start from those reports that have been produced by either the Auditor General, and then look at the issue of the procurement portal. Government has very good initiatives, and one of the initiatives government introduced is the procurement portal, and this procurement portal is supposed to avail information. During the COVID pandemic, we saw that a lot of monies were spent. We saw that a lot of procurement was done. But when you look at the portal, it doesn't have sufficient information regarding which entities procured or delivered what. And then remember that there were issues of poor quality masks, there were issues of substandard food. So we need to know which are these companies that produced these poor quality masks, which are these companies that produced poor quality or substandard food, and have they been blacklisted? Nothing of this sort has been done. But of course, we've continuously seen government come out and talk about corruption. So I think for me, it is the impunity and failure to implement government's own recommendations that come out from its own accountability agencies.
Please, I would want to pick it up from where Cissy has just left it. When she speaks about impunity, to take it a notch higher. I think it's the captivity that African countries find themselves in. You find that the regulatory institutions have been captured, the corporate sector is captured, the state is captured, and therefore, in a state of capture, you cannot have a functional institution. Today, across Africa, you would struggle to list more than 2 state institutions that are working, except for a few countries such as Botswana, Cissy mentioned it, Rwanda, trying. Tanzania, maybe during the regime of the late Magufuli, there was a sense in which was trying to deal with corruption. But elsewhere, African countries, have continued to kind of enjoy and pick treasure and happiness in being ranked among the league of the thugs and thieves. And we have leaders that seem to be happy with lead starving people, people that are poverty stricken, people that are powerless, people that are deprived of their rights, economies that have been captured by foreign powers, and to be specific, China. And therefore, we cannot fight corruption or make any headway in a situation where all the institutions of government are in captivity. And therefore, you also wonder, we've had South Africa has been grappling with issues of state capture. We talk about Nduguzuma and others. And therefore, in a state of captivity where private interest, for profit interest have kind of captured the instruments and power of the state, you cannot expect to have much headway in the fight against corruption. Back to you, Liz.
Yes, thank you, Henry. Cissy, you mentioned something interesting on the lifestyle audit. In your opinion, do you think this lifestyle audit can somehow help in the fight against corruption in the context of Uganda?
The lifestyle audit, ideally, it is a good idea, but the challenge is the practicability, and the lifestyle audit presupposes that citizens have information regarding the properties that their leaders own. But remember that the Leadership Code Act does not automatically make it obvious for citizens to know what their leaders own. And we know that most people, when they buy properties, they put it in the names of their spouses or their children, or even in their extended relatives. So with the lifestyle audit, we need to ask ourselves, what modus operandi, how is it going to operate? And then for some countries that have used the lifestyle audit, we have South Africa, we have Kenya, Malawi, Zimbabwe. The progress has really been very minimal. I can give an example of Kenya. Out of 600 audits that were done, only 20 were prosecutable. And then remember that in the lifestyle audit, it's going to be very, very expensive, because remember, you're going to look at the entire lifestyle of a person. You'll have to look at their children. Where do they go to school? If this person goes to lunch, where do they go for lunch? If this person goes out in the evening for a beer, where do they go? Which bars do they go to? Which hotels? What type of drinks? How many drinks? If a person goes to a gym, which type of gym? How much are they paying? How often do they go? If this person goes for holidays, now you're going to find that in the process, it's going to even be more expensive to investigate one person. And then when you look at the budget that the IG has, the budget is not sufficient enough to conduct a lifestyle audit. And then, is it going to be holistic? Because I know we are talking of starting with chief administrative officers and a few individuals there. One of the things we've realized that much as some initiatives are good, but they're implemented selectively. So, which is it going to be done holistically? Is it going to go for everyone, or is it going to go for a few small fish, quote unquote? So for me, the lifestyle audit may be good, but I think we need to the proceeds of crime bill has to be fast tracked to ensure that all these can fall under that. But again, we also know that you're not going to expect members of parliament or people to legislate against themselves. Just like the previous parliament decided to amend and remove a clause on spouses and children declaring. Because initially that law was a bit progressive, because children and spouses of leaders were also supposed to declare their wealth. Then in the wisdom of the previous parliament, again, wisdom, quote unquote, they decided to amend and drop that clause, and they only left themselves to declare. But we know that, I mean, by removing that particular clause, we're really going 5 steps backwards. So the lifestyle audit may not necessarily achieve its stated purpose, because people do not have the information that the leaders own, and it is going to be pretty expensive. But then it is also going to border on the right to privacy, because if I'm supposed to know where does a person go to in the evening to have a drink, where do they go for their, what meals are they having, how much is the cost of these meals? The Constitution is very clear on the right to privacy, so it's going to border, but on the right to, and we do not have a comprehensive legal framework. So as long as the initiative per se is going to be good, but do we have the money? How is it going to work? And what if it infringes on other people's right to privacy, and the process government is taking? So doing things haphazardly without a comprehensive legal framework may not necessarily see us achieving the good intentions of the lifestyle audit.
All right, thank you, Cissy, so much for that. We're going to go for a short break and we'll be right back. Welcome back from that short break, and let's continue from where we stopped. Cissy, I'll continue with you. Civil society in Uganda used to have an event around this time called the Anti-Corruption Week. Can you bring us up to speed with the Anti-Corruption Week's activities for this year?
All right, thank you. One of the activities that we had, I think, was 2 weeks ago, and we had a press conference. And the press conference, of course, was highlighting the various activities that are going to be done. Yesterday and today, we are having the anti-corruption convention, and it's going to be a 2-day convention where, again, issues of corruption are going to be discussed. Good enough, yesterday we had the Inspector General of Government herself was able to grace the one of the conventions, and we also had the Deputy Chairperson of the Leadership Code Tribunal attend the engagement as well. So the engagements are still ongoing, and of course we know that the theme for this year is more to do with the engaging the citizenry. So we focused more on the citizenry and whether they can trust the system to actually deliver on their promises to fight corruption. So yes, one of the it's more of dialogues anyway that we are doing, and we've been able to get some very good feedback, and also we've also decided to look back over the years. What have we managed to do? Because we've had quite a number of anti-corruption weeks, and we had to reflect on some of the things that we've done over time. And we realize that, yes, over time we've been able to advocate for enactment, or we've inputted into some legislations, which legislations like the Whistleblowers Act, the Leadership Code Act. We've seen some of our input being taken, and we've been able to continuously engage with the media to expose issues of corruption. We've again continued to probably simplify Auditor General's report, simplify them, and advocate along the lines of ensuring that the Auditor General's recommendations are implemented. But yeah, a brief of the activities, that is what we've done. And I think various dialogues have also been held in various sub-country places. I think there was also a marathon last week, again to commemorate the anti-corruption. So those are briefly the activities that have been taken. Of course, I know tomorrow, I think to crown it all, there's supposed to be a function at Kololo, which is going to be there. I think the head of state is going to be there, but that's a government space where we've been also invited to attend. So, of course, tomorrow is the International Anti-Corruption Day, and it's supposed to be at Kololo, and people have been invited to go and attend. So we're going to be very eager, actually, to listen in to know what the president is going to say this time round, because I know in most cases the president has come out and said quite some very good, interesting things every anti-corruption week. Because in one of the weeks he talked of asset recovery, and we still lack a comprehensive asset recovery regime. People steal properties and they take the monies out of the a country. We don't have a cooperation agreement with particular countries such that in case a particular public official stole money or has properties in another country, we still can't bring back some of those properties. But in one of the anti-corruption weeks, I remember the president talking about asset recovery. So I'm just curious to know what he's going to say tomorrow about the status of the law, since he hinted on it in one of his previous statements during the anti-corruption week.
All right. Thank you so much, Cissy, and thank you for the great work you're doing against this fight. And you raised something important about asset recovery and how these big fish have been engaging in offshore corruption activities. That brings me to my next question, and this is going to be forwarded to Prisca. There's a press statement that has gone viral on social media. It's signed by Brigadier General Flavia Viekwaso, indicating that the US government has slammed unilateral financial sanctions against Major General Abel Kandiho, who is the UPDF Chief of Military Intelligence. What more do you know about this letter, Prisca? And could this be a consequence of corruption? This is the letter that's displayed on the screen.
You looked
Prisca,
at
you seem to be
it, but
muted.
okay. Are you getting me now?
Yes, I can hear you.
Hello. Yes. So I also looked at that letter as you. It just came to my phone as the rest of the country did, but and it has left the people divided on Twitter. On the people who are pro-government are questioning the evidence that the US has against their dear Abel, while those that are familiar with the atrocities that the army has done, they believe that US has done a thorough job. But it's not the first. We've had such similar instances of the sanctions slapped by the US, and I think there have been most in this year, 2020, 2021. We've seen more sanctions against our UPDF officials and government officials from the US as compared to the other periods. And this speaks volumes about the relationship between Uganda and the US. And over time, when these sanctions have been filed, slapped on people. I remember when we spoke to the people like Edwelus, they said for them they are not dying to go to the US, and they are comfortable living in Uganda. But for the people who were close to the former IGP Kaihura, they can tell you that the sanctions hit him hard because his wife and the kids, like some of the kids were studying in the US, and he was up in arms asking even journalists to talk to some of the US embassy officials to lift the sanctions, because these people might come up and give us the brave face. I throw around words that I'm not dying to go to the US, but the US sanctions are deeper than what we think, because you cannot, they stretch back to the US allies. It's not limited to only Uganda. When the US sanctions you, they set a precedence for the EU also to do the same, because these are tight allies. And the sanctions means you were even forbid from transacting any business in dollars. And the people who usually receive these sanctions are the people who are rich and they have businesses everywhere. A person like me, if the US threw a sanction on me, really, what would it mean anyway? But by the time the US has, first of all, does an audit on your lifestyle and knows what is going to hit you most. If US knows that their sanctions are going to hit your businesses, that is where they go. They go for something that is going to hit you most. And of course, the EPDF will always, now they've changed their tone. They're now asking for a fair hearing, and why they were not notified according to Flavia's tone. And the public is asking them, you didn't give the people in Kasese a fair hearing. You didn't give the people in downtown Kampala a fair hearing when you're showering them with blades. why should the US accord you with the same fair hearing? They're asking, is it where there's the red line cut? But this speaks, recently there was the Monitor reported about Uganda not being invited for some democracy summit by Biden that is going to take place. Biden is going to hold with some African countries and the other nations. And so it has the latest sanctions now is speaking volumes about the tricky relationship that Uganda is having with the US. They are now scrambling. Now, with the latest news about China almost taking over our airport, it looks like Uganda is in the middle because the Chinese think Uganda offended them by even releasing that news. So now Uganda is in between. Does not know, should we lie to China? Should we go to China for to act as our friend, or should we come to the US? But the same US is throwing sanctions at us. So it's really these latest sanctions. The people who are not so much into the geopolitics, they may think it's just a mere letter, but I can tell you these sanctions come with a series of meetings. I'm very sure the officials at the embassy have received enough phone calls from Uganda, the army, and even State House itself to explain. Because it looks like the wording of Flavia's letter, they were caught off guard. They didn't see it coming.
Prisca, I'm going to have to cut you short there, but thank you though. And Henry, sticking to this letter, Henry, are you there?
Yes, I am here, Elizabeth.
Yeah, sticking to this letter and the recent findings from the Pandora Papers in October that shocked Ugandans. We saw a number of big wigs in the UPDF that were exposed. Do you think that all this could be a consequence of corruption?
Thank you very much, Lisa, and thank you for bringing up that letter, because that letter is a tip of the iceberg. The tragedy of Africa has been that the men with big political muscles, big military muscles, have been engaging in massive looting, and they've been protected by the system. The people, the cronies of these men with the big political muscles have also been doing the same and depriving and looting Africa, almost with impunity and getting away with everything. So the lack of consequences to the men and women who have been thieving and depriving Africans of a good livelihood, having gotten away with it, has come to the concern of the powers in the West. And therefore, we know that for the last period of time, quite a number of these men I talked about with the big political muscles, military muscles, have been engaging in offshore trading. They have hidden their wealth. They have stashed away lots of monies in those tax haven countries, Mauritius, some of them in Switzerland, and so on. And therefore, that they have failed to invest in their people, that they continue to violate rights and get away with it. I think the international community has is trying to come to the rescue. I know for a fact, and I was just checking here, a former Hong Kong politician, his name is Ho Jinping. He's serving a sentence in the US. Part of the crimes he was convicted of is bribing a certain Yoweri Museveni, who is the president of Uganda. But in Uganda, there's no such a thing being mentioned, all right? We do know that there are quite a number of officials in Uganda who have engaged in predicate crimes. They have amassed money and acquired wealth through these predicate crimes such as trafficking in illegal trafficking in human organs, illegal trafficking in wildlife products, but others have also engaged in massive looting. And they have failed to launder money. They have laundered this money through stashing it away in the real estate businesses there in many of those countries. So by the time a country such as America comes up to slap sanctions on an individual, regardless of the size of their military muscles, the US will have evidence. But they do know that the system is protecting them. And therefore, this letter is pointing to many, and I think sending a signal that even if you are protected internally, out there, the system will not protect you. And let me also send this kind of advice. The time will come when the regimes that are protecting these men and women will go. Because in life, it is a truth of life that everything that has a beginning must have an end. But when that end comes, when not even the internal in-country system can protect you, push will come to shove, and you will face sanctions. And therefore, I think it's a message. It's also a pointer to how many others are on the list. I think for us as civil society, we would be interested in the list because we hear from certain corners that these Americans have a list, that this was just one of the names on that list. So many others are going to face these consequences, and these consequences bite because they are extended to also your family, your relatives, your sisters' children, your brothers' children. Okay, I know for a fact that immediately they slammed the sanctions on Kaihura, his son who was studying in the US was deported. That was immediate, and therefore, and we live in a global village. You can console yourself however you want. I'm a I don't need anything from Europe, but the truth is you do. Because your children want to travel there, your relatives want to do business. So I think these are some of the ways that just trying to show us how, as Africans, how we should handle and relate with the corrupt. Back to you, Lisa.
Yes, Henry. Please stay with me there. So, why do African governments fail to impose sanctions against these men and women that engage in grand corruption? Why do we have to wait for the US to be the one to impose these sanctions, and yet these people live here with us?
There's a sense in which we Africans have accepted, and I don't understand why. Because you see, on my village, my people cannot tolerate a chicken thief. They get a chicken thief, they will handle that chicken thief there and then, and he will curse the very day he thought about stealing chicken. But a thief who has stolen shillings, a thief who has stolen valley dams, a thief who has stolen bridges and roads and schools and COVID money is treated and welcomed with kid gloves and accorded all the prestigious what is it called? What is the word in English? The VIP treatment. That even when they go to churches, they afforded the front row. They become kings. So why is it that we cannot afford a thief who cannot tolerate a thief who has stolen our chicken? But when it comes to a thief who has stolen our schools, our health centers, our roads, our bridges, we are tolerating them. So it is the problem of Africa. The leaders come from the same society of that is tolerating this, and of course, it goes back to the whole social fabric that we need to work on, because corruption seems to have corrosively eroded the moral fabric we had as Africans, and we seem to have lost our cultural anchor as well. And I think these are discussions we should have as Africans, and because the truth be told, that until we have dealt with corruption, we are not going to have much headway. Even the whole notion of middle-income country may not be achieved until we have dealt with this. Thank you, Liz.
Thank you, Henry, for that. And you raised something really interesting, which brings me to my next question. You say the people of Uganda have just become onlookers to people that are stealing billions, and yet they do not tolerate chicken thieves. So the IGG recently announced her new strategy of taking the fight against corruption to the people and making this fight a people's war. Cissy, what is your view about this strategy if the people themselves merely look on these people that steal billions and can't do anything about it? Cissy, are you there?
I think we lost Cissy.
Okay. Prisca, maybe you can answer this. Oh, she's back.
No, I was saying that I'm available for the next 5 minutes. I need to go for another interview.
All right. This
The
could.
question you asked, Henry, of the whole issue of the chicken thieves, I think we're just hypocritical. But then also, secondly, I think we have accepted the petty corruption, and we tend to look more at grand corruption. And I think for me, 3 minutes. And I think for me, one of the issues that comes out is that it's all that setting of being hypocritical that we, the chicken thieves, who can go for, and I think you need to ask yourself, who are the chicken thieves? And who are those who engage in grand corruption? So those who engage in grand corruption, in most cases, these are untouchables. And of course, just like this guy who sold grasshoppers on the plane, and I think has been in prison for 5 years or so. So when you read the Twitter thing, people are saying that, guys, we've had many people who have stolen, and you're going for this guy. And I think that alone, one of the things we've been doing as an organization is we're trying to look at the reason why people are convicted and they still remain on their payroll. And someone one time told us that, you see, the people who are convicted, what have they been convicted of? Most of them have stolen like maybe 10 million, 20, but then you want us to remove those people from their payroll, and yet you have people who have stolen billions and billions still in government. So when you talk to some people one-on-one, you're going to realize that the chicken thief, those are very easy targets. Those ones we can count them off. But when it comes to the grand corruption, in most cases, these are syndicates with people who are highly, highly connected in the system. So we will always go for the chicken thieves, like these guys who sold the grasshoppers. Those ones we can go for, and we can highly publicize it. But when it comes to grand corruption, cross-border corruption, that one we rarely take in action. We should always come up with justifications. We should always come up with various legalese to justify the reasons as to why we cannot go for those that have stolen big monies. Can you kindly allow me to log off?
Yes,
I need to go for
Cissy,
the
before you
interview.
go, just
Yes.
one last question before you go. This
Okay.
new strategy announced by the IGG Betty Kamya on bringing the war to the people, do you think it's
Yeah.
feasible? Do you think it will work?
It's very feasible, but it's going to take quite some time because there's need to change the mindset. There's a lot of apathy among the population because the population does feel that the fight against corruption is at times selective. That's why you hear the so-called issue of the big fish. So people keep asking themselves, where is the big fish? So if people still don't trust, much as you're trying to bring the fight to the people, are they trusting you? Do they trust you to actually take up their recommendations? We've heard of situations whereby people go to particular government offices, they report a case. As they're moving out, they receive a phone call. The same person whom they have reported is calling them and telling them, by the way, I know you've reported me to this office ABCD. So we need to ask us, do people actually trust the government to actually protect them? We don't have a comprehensive witness protection law. So when you're bringing the fight to the people, you also need to assess the risks that people are most likely to encounter when they're reporting or when they're whistleblowing. But again, ask yourself, do you have a comprehensive legal framework that is going to protect these people who are going to come and give you information?
Mhm. Thank you
Yes.
so much, Cissy, for that. Let me not delay you anymore.
Thank you, and
Thank
thank you for
you.
the opportunity.
All right. So, Prisca, I'll bring you in here. What do you think were the orders given to the new IGG by her appointing authority to go out there and fight corruption, or to go and be seen to be fighting corruption without really fighting it? And could this be the same story in other African countries? Prisca, please unmute.
I tend to think that the fight against corruption by the regime is simply posturing around to the international community. Uganda has Museveni has sold this myth that he's a peacemaker and someone who a humanitarian. So most times he tends to posture around to the international community that he's trying to do something. So because whereas he may give Kamya the orders to fight corruption and make all those statements, is he backing up these orders with actions? Because as Cissy told you that we have the IGG reports. Let him start with those. When the LOP Mpuga was replying to the statement made by the minister at Parliament. He said it is perhaps time we stopped considering this coming budget until we get a treasury memorandum of all the reports. We have over reports of about 15 to 10 years that have been investigated and scrutinized by Parliament, but there is no memorandum. So until we get that willingness of him trying to fight corruption, it will be hard for even to convince Ugandans, because if we are looking at the very people, you realize the debate that was raised when he appointed Kaboyo as a minister, someone who has been convicted of corruption. But he made the appointment a few days after he had made threats about fighting corruption. I tend to think that his sole existence is just to provoke Ugandans, because I mean, what would explain the reason as why you go to a national podium, you threaten to fight corruption, then about a week after you appoint someone who was convicted of corruption? If it is not provoking Ugandans, what would really be the essence of making such thing? But on the issue of the failure of fighting corruption, why this is the question you asked, Cissy. I tend to think we have it, as Ugandans, we have come to accept corruption as part of our culture, and it dates back. Because, for instance, if you woke up one day and you were appointed a minister, all your relatives will think they have been appointed also, because they will imagine that they're also going to benefit, and you trying to act otherwise, it will mean it will bring enemies to your side. And it gave me an example of the Kamukama, Dora Kamukama, the lady who, the former state minister, because people have said that office of the state minister for economic monitoring is bewitched, because everyone who goes to that office loses an election, and the current occupant is Ogwang. So one of the journalists at Parliament said that the reason as to why she lost in Kazo is because even when she was at State House, she never connected them to scholarships. You see that? So we tend to think an office is hereditary. I must benefit. So it will be, unless that cultural perspective is broken, it will be hard for us to fight corruption.
Thank you so much, Prisca. That reminds me of a constituency in Western Uganda where the voters said they were voting our thief. So that shows you the type of communities that we are dealing with. So back to you, Henry. What do you think is the relationship between corruption and democratic stagnation or backsliding?
Thank you very much, Lisa. That's a very good question, and I can tell the time has run out. When you look across Africa, I think it is not by coincidence that the countries that are ranked as among the most corrupt are also the very countries in Africa where we are seeing democratic backsliding. The point I'm making is that corruption is an antidote to democracy, and that we cannot begin talking about democracy or democratization when there is corruption. So until Uganda deals with corruption, we will not be able to progress on the trajectory of democracy. But let me, as my last point, because time is fast running out, I think when Prisca talks about provoking Ugandans, I think provoking may be an understatement. The posturing and statements we are seeing from the state have not only provoked us, but they have bastardized, sodomized, defiled, and insulted our intelligence, because they say one thing and they do the next. It's as if, who do you think Ugandans are anyway? Who do you think Africans are? We have no brains between our ears, and therefore I think the people are angry. Corruption has to be dealt with. All of this gimmick and posturing and nice statements about taking it to the middle-income country. Which middle-income country can you achieve with before you address corruption? Stop hoodwinking us. Thank you, Lisa, and back to you. Those are my last words.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Henry. So Prisca, just for your closing remarks, just give us what you think Africa should do going forward to deal with corruption in a few seconds. Prisca? Prisca seems to be having trouble with her network, but it's been a very interesting conversation, a very interesting 1 hour. Thank you very much, all those that tuned in, and we hope to see you next week, same place, same time. Have a lovely week.